So we're back talking about the best tier 10 cruisers in the tech tree that you can grind in 2023. I think there's a lot of great picks here. And again, we're just talking about the tech tree cruisers. I want to focus on what I think you should be thinking about grinding. There's some very interesting and unique ships here. And I think cruisers are a great place to start for a lot of beginners. I think that's a fun class with high DPM, a lot of action. And there's a lot of great opportunities to learn how to play a lot of these maps in most of these cruisers. There's a lot of open water, great cruisers, and there's great cruisers for hiding behind islands, spamming over them, learning how to make use of the map to give yourself an edge. I think that's very important as you learn to get better at World of Warships. And cruisers are going to be a great option for that. Before we get started, though, I should mention again that I do have a one-take playlist. I'll be linking that in the description down below, but definitely go check it out on the channel if you're looking for more live action games with these ships. I try to take a look at them in a more realistic sense rather than just saving my best games and only showing you those of these ships. That's the one-take series. Definitely give it a look for the ship that you're interested in. I won't quite have them all finished, but my plan is to get through all of the tier 10 tech tree ships very soon, and then we'll be moving on to a lot of the premium tier 10s, some of the reward ships, so you get an idea of those as well. But to start with the tier 10 cruisers in the tech tree, I'm going to go with Hindenburg to start. I think this is a great B tier cruiser. I think it's an excellent ship in World of Warships, jack of all trades style, but doesn't do anything particularly amazingly. It's a decent long-range open water ship, but it has 30mm armor, which, as we talked about in the battleship video, is a pretty important thing for battleships to be able to overmatch, and there's a lot of overmatch these days. So Hindenburg can kind of get wrecked if you take the wrong battleship overmatching salvo. The DPM, though, is quite nice, especially the AP. It hits quite hard, although the pen is pretty bad out to longer ranges, so you're just relying on full pens at that point. The HE does pen 50mm, so you're going to be melting battleships reasonably easily, but there's nothing like a radar to help you contest caps, and the shells can get a little bit floaty out to ranges. So a decent cruiser, but it's not particularly unique, and I think there's better long-range farmers and close-range battle impact style cruisers in the game. Next up, we got Zhao. I'm putting this one down in C tier, even with its more recent buffs. I think it's just a worse Hindenburg, honestly. A lot of the time, it is that same open water, long-range HE spammer, and while it's more accurate and has better HE, the turret angles are a pain on the Zhao, and it results in you actually taking more damage because you're not able to angle quite as well. This thing doesn't have a turtleback or anything either that the Hindenburg does have, so if you're broadside, you can definitely be punished quite heavily. The torpedoes are very hard to use thanks to poor angles as well. Zhao is just a very difficult ship to play. It can fit into great battle impact roles where you follow a destroyer in close and just blap the enemy DD from around 9 kilometers away. It's very good at that. But the Venice has kind of taken that role. So I think that Zhao isn't really the best ship to go for, at least coming up in 2023. Now up in A tier, we've got the Henri IV. Not necessarily because Henry is so strong. I think Condé is just so ridiculous that it should be one of the first super ships you start to look for. I didn't really want to include that here, but let's be honest, everyone is looking at the super ships eventually to get if you're new to the game or if you've been playing for quite some time, and Condé is certainly one of them you should be looking for. Henry itself is a very strong long-range HE spammer. It just can't do the acceleration juking that it used to do. That's one of the big downsides of Henry. But it's quite quick, and having a reload booster is very, very fun. So it's a decent ship. I'd probably put it in B tier, but just because Condé is in the game and is after the Henry, I think it's one that you just got to go for. At least if you've played the game for quite some time. Certainly not the first line I'd be looking at if I hadn't played any cruisers before. Up next, we have the other French cruiser, and that's the Marseille. I don't like this ship very much. The AP hits very hard. It's got good long-range guns. It just doesn't have the battle impact that I'm looking for in a cruiser. And I feel very limited in what this ship is capable of doing. It wants to play a little bit more aggressive. It wants to play more bow in because all the turrets are at the front. And yet it doesn't quite have the armor to hold up at tier 10. It's a tough ship to play, in my opinion. It can be very good on a flank if you're getting use out of that AP into broadside cruisers. Even battleships you can citadel at closer ranges. Just a very difficult ship to play, and a little bit more boring because of the longer reload as well. So not one that I would recommend to very many people, but it is a very different playstyle, gets you more into that battle cruiser kind of idea. Up next, we got the Minotaur, and I put it in B tier because this ship is a very polarizing ship. For you watching this video, and if you've played it before, it's probably up in S tier or way down in D tier. I don't really see it being anywhere else for a lot of people. You probably feel like you just die all the time and have very little battle impact with it, or you have a ton of fun flying around the map, just peppering people with the AP, getting great flanks, using the smokes, or even the radar Minotaur to have a ton of battle impact. There's really no in between. However, it is a hard ship to play. I don't think this is an easy cruiser at all, so if you're newer to the game, yes, it can be a lot of fun, and you're going to see a lot of clips on YouTube of just amazing matches in the Minotaur. It's very difficult, though, and especially for newer players, if you're trying to use that smoke screen, these ships don't slow down very quickly, and the gigantic citadel makes them very vulnerable to battleships. So if you don't know what you're doing, I can't really recommend this, but if you don't have the Minotaur and you're an experienced cruiser player, I think you got to go for this one. So there's really not much of an in-between here, so I just decided to throw it in B tier. For our first S tier, we got the Des Moines. What a classic. I love playing the Des Moines. Having 203s, the bigger caliber cruiser guns that reload about as fast as the light cruiser guns. It's amazing. The AP has improved pen angles, so it's incredibly powerful at closer ranges. The floaty shell arcs and somewhat poor dispersion can be a bit difficult to get used to, but decent concealment combined with a great longer range radar, 10 kilometers, it lasts a long time. It's huge battle impact here in the Des Moines, and if you learn how to use islands as you're playing up through the line, Des Moines is a monster on most maps. It's very, very difficult to deal with, and can carry almost any match. It's really, really strong, able to deal with destroyers, cruisers, and battleships alike. So if you're a more experienced player and you don't have the Des Moines, I think you definitely got to go for it. If you're newer to the game, it can be difficult to make use of this ship. You might get too greedy for the radar, or if you don't know how to use island cover on maps. It can be a little bit difficult, but the absolute strength of Des Moines is awesome in random battles. I love it. So definitely one to consider for both new and experienced players. Up next, we got the Venezia. This is another A-tier ship for me. I think that this is one of the more powerful cruisers in the game. Having this fuel smoke screen, which means you're able to remain concealed while traveling at full speed. It's amazing. This ship uses sap as an ammo type, which just destroys everything. It's incredibly powerful. You get the alpha damage of armor piercing with most of the consistency of high explosive. It has a bit of a longer reload, but 15 sap shells are easily able to do 15,000 damage per salvo if you're hitting the right parts of ships. It's also extremely maneuverable, very difficult to hit, and has pretty decent armor. Like I said, when it came to Zhao, that the Venezia kind of overtook that role. If you're playing in a div with a DD or a radar, and you're able to sneak up close to a cap, blap a DD for basically all of its health, and then use the smoke screen to run away, you're going to win a lot of games that way. You can even do that in random battles without a div. Follow somewhat closely behind your friendly DD. You'll win a lot of sides of maps like that. I have a ton of fun playing Venezia. It's not necessarily the best line for beginners, but it's very unique and extremely strong. So if you're more experienced and you don't have a Venezia, you should definitely think about getting it. And for newer players, I'd probably go for a different line first, maybe the Des Moines or even something like Hindenburg a little bit earlier on to have a bit more vanilla experience before the Venezia, but it should be on your shortlist still. The Gouden Leeuw, I think, is solidly B tier. It's a decent tier 10 cruiser if you're able to make use of the airstrike gimmick, which is very strong, but a little bit difficult to use. It's a very solid tier 10 cruiser. If you're not making good use of that, the main guns are a little bit disappointing. You'll find the damage output is a little bit weak, and since there's no radar here, it's tough to make use of this ship to have a lot of battle impact. Keep in mind as well that this ship is going to get anti-submarine warfare soon. That was announced on the dev blogs recently. Very excited to see that, but for now it struggles mightily against these submarines. And while its armor is decent, it really can't hold up to battleships. You do have a fast cooldown heal, a lot like the Massachusetts and Ohio style heal, which is nice to keep it alive, but if you're playing those kind of bow-in stationary positions, you don't have fire prevention, the fires last a long time. It's very easy to get killed in a Gouden Leeuw, so not a great line for beginners, and if you're more experienced at the game, you'll probably do okay, but I think there's more interesting lines to play before getting the Gouden Leeuw. Next, we got the Jinan, following in the Marseille in D tier. I think the game is just too passive for Jinan. It's just got no range, the shell velocity is bad. Yes, you do have smoke and amazing torpedoes, but the instant anyone sees a Jinan on the enemy team and sees some deep water torps or your smoke, or you just get spotted, no one's pushing into you. It's a very, very difficult ship to play. And the grind is horrible. This is a very frustrating grind, at least I found it that way. It's very, very difficult to make use of these ships. They lack range, they lack DPM. They need to make use of these torps to actually get a lot of battle impact. No radar here. You do get smokes, which is nice. But like I said, lack of range, shell velocity, DPM means a lot of the time you're struggling to get damage. So don't recommend it for beginners and even for experienced players. I think this is a pretty easy skip. Now on to the Petro. I'm also putting this one up in A tier. I find the dispersion to be a little bit frustrating sometimes, but honestly, 12-kilometer radar, even with a short duration, is extremely powerful. This ship also has surprisingly good concealment. It's extremely low in the water and has a lot of armor. So a very tanky, difficult ship to kill. The battleship kind of guns are really strong, even with the dispersion not being amazing. The pen on these guns are almost battleship level. They have improved pen angles on the AP, and the HE is just kind of okay here. Petro's a very strong ship. I just don't really want to play it all the time. It feels weird to me. I think it's a very powerful ship, even more powerful than Des Moines in a lot of cases. I just find it a little frustrating to play with that dispersion at times. It has 360 turrets, meaning it makes up for its very slow turret traverse by just never having to do that 180. It's very, very handy to have, but I think it's a solid A tier. If you're newer to the game, I think the grind up to it will be a little awkward since you're going to be playing a lot of light cruisers, and then eventually you'll get into this tankiness right at the end of the line, but it's a very good reward. If you're experienced with the game and you don't have a Petro, you should probably go get it. But probably not the first line you should be looking at if you're new to cruisers. Up next, we got Yodo. This one really isn't quite out yet, but considering that you'll be able to research it early next year in Update 12, I had to put it on the list, and I think it's just C tier. I think the Japanese cruisers at tier 10, pretty much C tier. They're just not great. There's plenty of better options in the roles that they want to accomplish. The problem with Yodo is kind of poor DPM, even with 1850 millimeter guns, and the shells are so floaty. So even though you have good range, it's very difficult to make use of that range. And even though the torpedoes are much better than Zhao's and much more usable, it's very difficult to make use of them. Yodo is a tough ship to play, and it felt like it just didn't have much battle impact for me. I don't know. I just didn't enjoy playing it so far. Keep in mind, though, that was only in early access. I only have access to it on my CC kind of press account to make videos on, so I don't actually own it on my main account. So I'll be getting it soon and playing it early next year. But for now, it's just a mediocre ship. Not good for beginners, certainly not the line. For more experienced players, maybe you'll enjoy it, but we got a couple other light cruisers coming up that are much, much better. But before we get to those two, we have the Goliath, the last heavy cruiser we're going to talk about, at least for the tech tree tier 10s. And Goliath is an extremely strong ship thanks to its survivability. It has a lot of HP, and it has a super heal. So a lot like the Conqueror, this ship can just heal back from damage over and over and over again. The guns have a long reload and have very floaty shells, but they're very high caliber and they do a ton of damage per salvo. So a very strong ship in the right circumstances. You want to be kiting away. You want to be having the enemy team pushing into you. You want to be running away slowly, delaying kind of a fighting retreat. And thanks to your super heal, it's going to be very difficult for the enemy team to take you down. And you're going to have that better shell velocity as people push into you, because as always, you don't have to lead quite as far when people are getting closer to you all the time. So if you're pushing into people, Goliath can be kind of tricky to make use of, but it's very, very strong. Little bit of a weird one to play though, so that's why I have it in B tier. I think it's a strong enough one that if you don't have it and you've played the game a lot, it's probably one you could go for. But for beginners, I don't know if I'd really recommend this line. Up next, we have the Nevsky, and alongside the Petro, you also have a 12-kilometer radar. This time, you actually have a longer duration. These guns are also kind of halfway between a light cruiser and a heavy cruiser, so their caliber is enough that you're actually getting really good shell velocity here. But the dispersion sucks, unfortunately. The reload is awesome, so it's a very, very strong ship for dealing with DDs. The concealment is pretty good as well, so a high battle impact ship that's able to farm battleships extremely well, able to deal with destroyers and cap control very, very well. And even against cruisers, this shell velocity is very difficult to deal with, since this ship can be peppering you from 17 kilometers away very easily, and you might struggle at those ranges. Let's say you're in a Des Moines, for example. That's a fight I don't want to be taking. Long range against a Nevsky, I'll probably lose. So Nevsky, very strong. Definitely could go in S tier, I think, but it's just a big target. So I think it's a bit of a clumsy ship to use, and a lot of people are going to focus it because it is a powerful radar cruiser. So keep that in mind. And again, with the dispersion, I just can't put it in S tier for me. It's much, much worse than the Des Moines dispersion. Even though I did complain about Des Moines dispersion a little bit, Nevsky is a weird one. As for if you should get it, I think you could definitely consider going up this line as a new player. Unlike the Petro, you are still maintaining that light cruiser playstyle all the way through the line. I think it's a little bit more consistent for newer players, and the extra shell velocity and range is going to be a little bit more comfortable for new players if you're not going up something like the Des Moines line or even the Hindenburg line, for example. I think it's a great ship for that, and if you don't have this ship and you're an experienced player, definitely on the short list for you. And the last ship we have to talk about is the Worcester. This is an amazing tier 10 cruiser. I think both the Tech Tree American tier 10 cruisers are some of the best cruisers in the game. I have some of my absolute best matches in random battles in these two ships. Thanks to their radar, their high DPM, means they have so much battle impact. I find I can influence most of the matches I'm in, even as a solo player, not even going in as a division. I feel extremely confident to carry a lot of my games. The Worcester, unlike the Des Moines, has better DPM in that HE department. However, the AP is certainly not as valuable as the Des Moines. So a Worcester against a Des Moines at close range is probably going to lose. But against everything else, the HE spam is extremely powerful here. Again, another ship that you want to learn maps and islands that you can make use of to farm over. It's very, very powerful. Great concealment here again. Although the line is a little bit weird to grind up. I think Seattle is a bit of a pain point. Although, to be fair, going up the Des Moines line, Buffalo is also a main pain point. So that's the tier 9s of these two ships. A little bit tricky to get through, but the tier 10 rewards are awesome. If you're a new player, I think this is the light cruiser that kind of teaches you how to play cruisers. And Des Moines is the heavy cruiser that teaches you how to play more heavy cruisers. And if you've played the game for quite some time and you don't have either one of these two S tier ships from me, I think you should definitely try and get some of them. So that's going to be the list of Tech Tree tier 10 cruisers that I think you should be looking to grind in 2023. Just to be clear, for those of you who are new to the game and looking at these cruisers, there's a lot of different reasons that I've moved these ships around this list. If you're looking for a very vanilla experience, just go up the Hindenburg line. It's solid all the way through, and you don't have the pressure of trying to use a radar or trying to figure out that battle impact. You can just play the game at your own pace and learn things slowly. But if you do want that battle impact and a much better reward at the end, I think the Des Moines and the Worcester are great ones to go for. Nevsky, Petro, Venice, also pretty solid options, although Venice is a little bit of a weird one to play. Henry, again, Conde is just so amazing that I had to put it up there. But that's it. That's going to do it for me. Thank you very much for watching this video. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. This is by no means a definitive list, just my thoughts on the tier 10 cruisers and which ones are worthwhile grinding in 2023. Thanks for watching this video, and I hope you have a great rest of your holidays. Merry Christmas, everyone.